Okay, so I'm gonna make a quick overview of this spec to pretty much give you an oversight of what everything entails, of what the different terminology means, of what I mean in these specs. But before it, a very important note is that things in this spec are not set in stone. Things here are subject to change because the project has not been released yet, and I'm recording this in advanced. And you know, uh, given that if BNB wants some changes, some other TAs think something may be written better, something might be easier or too hard or whatever, everything is subject to change, right? So always refer to the rubric and not this video to know how everything must work. This is just an overview, okay? And this is just not very important details that you will read on your own time. I won't go too much over them. What I will say is that this is a very important remark. Everything added to the game must be unique in every way. Its own texture, its own name, its own implementation. In case of armors and tools, like they must have custom values, custom uh, speed, hardness, resistance, defense. Everything must be different from any of the ones currently in game. Everything must have their own recipe, and the recipes must use the items from phase 1 in the case of the armor and wherever it specifies it, right? So for example here too. Okay, so as to the main feature here, this is the mana sword feature, as you probably know already. The first thing that I want to say is, what is a tile entity? A normal block in Minecraft only stores very limited amount of data, right? Because most blocks are by the thousands in the game. So a tile entity is a specific type of ghost block, quote unquote, that is tied to a specific block to store extra information for when the world closes and opens back up, right? That's what a tile entity is. And typically you make your block class and then you make your tile entity class and you tie that tile entity to your block so that when you place that block, it'll create a tile entity and tie it to it. Okay, so first I'm gonna just read all of this, more or less try and translate it as I go, and then I'm gonna show you an in-game practice of everything and how it works. Okay, so you need to implement a new tile entity, flower block. It must not be a full 16 by 16 block, right? So a normal block in Minecraft is 16 pixels by 16 pixels by 16 pixels. This block can't be that size, right? That's all that I'm specifying it. If you want to make it 15 by 15 by 15, that's up to you, right? That's technically all right. But you know, the idea is that you make it smaller, like an actual flower in game that is actually like 4 by 4 by 6, I think a normal flower is in Minecraft. You can, instead of extending from block, you can extend from flower, and it should already give you an idea by entering the flower class on how things work. Okay, so in this flower needs to store a predefined amount of quote unquote mana, right? This mana is just an integer, okay? You don't have to go full on and make a mana class and have it do an instance of mana and everything. You can just save it as an integer or a float or a double, right? And the flower must start with 0 mana. And whatever mana the flower has must be the same when I close and open the game, right? So like every time I open the game, the mana shouldn't go back to 0. Okay, you need to make it so that when I right click the flower with an empty hand, it'll look in a 3 by 3 by 1, one being the height, block radius, height has to be the same as the flower block, and it'll look for blocks of coal or charcoal. It'll make them disappear and it'll spawn fire where the block was. And per every coal or charcoal block that it consumed, it'll generate X amount of mana, where X is a number defined by you. Okay? If the flower has reached that predefined amount of mana, so that max limit, it will not consume the block and it will not raise it anymore. Okay? And les recomiendo that it also doesn't look for blocks if it's full of mana. That's just an efficiency point, and the rubric always checks for efficiency. Okay, so even though it doesn't tell you that it shouldn't look for the block if it's full of mana, you should do it anyways because that is an efficiency remark. Okay, the mana must persist. This is what I already mentioned. Then you need to implement a sword item, so it needs to be a sword for all matter and purposes. Only one can stack, deals damage, has durability. It must extend from item sword, and it must store also a predefined amount of mana. It can also be an integer, and it must behave in all the ways exactly like the mana from the flower, right? So it must persist, it must have a limit, everything that I already said about the mana on the flower, this mana must behave exactly the same way. And when I right click the flower with the sword, it'll transfer Y amount of mana from the flower into the sword, right? So where you do this, you can do this in the flower. You can say when I right click the flower, check if it's a sword, and if it's a sword, then take some mana off from the variable mana here and save it on the sword if the sword is an instance of whatever sword you created. Or you can do it in the sword. When I right click the sword, detect what block I'm clicking, and if the block is a flower block of mana flower, then transfer, right? Regardless, Y amount must go down from the flower and Y amount must go up in the sword. Okay? And that Y amount is defined by you. If the flower doesn't have mana, it shouldn't go to negative and it shouldn't add to the sword. If the sword is in max, it shouldn't take anything from the flower and the sword shouldn't go up. Okay? Then the item tooltip must display the mana stored in the flower, and when I transfer that mana, there should be a message in the chat telling the player the new amount of mana in the flower. Okay? Finally, the sword's attack must go up as mana goes in it, and back down as I use mana. So the sword should have a default attack value, and as it stores more mana, it should go up, but as I go down, it should go down too. Okay? I think that's pretty much it for the specs. Let's go into the game so I can show you both implementations. I've implemented every spec that I given, so you're gonna see a lot more items. I also have other mods in my instance, so you're gonna see other tabs and stuff like this that I can grab from here, my stuff. Okay, and you'll see that if I actually go into game mode creative and I go into my tab, the flower is here and the sword is also here. Okay, so if I put my flower here and I right click it, I implemented it with a stick, right? My implementations are slightly different, but the point stands, right? Mana stored 0 and attack 3. This is what I mean by the tooltip also. Okay, and the flower, you should also add some tooltip explaining how they work. Okay, so now if I look for some coal blocks, right, and I put some coal here, some coal here. Okay, let's put this one 2 here, this one 3 here, and this one 1, 2, 3, 4 here, right? If I right click it, mine is a 2 block radius, as you can see, 1, 2 block radius, turned into fire. These and these were not affected, and if I hit it with a stick, it's 50, right? Mine does 25 per, right? There you go. I also do some particles. You don't have to do those particles. Okay, so now if I go, I have 125, I have 0, 25, 50, 75. Okay, now it has 75. If I keep doing, you can also notice that it did a little bit less. That's the implementation that I made. It passes a little bit less to the sword, right? So if I do that, it's a lot of fire. If I keep passing mana to the sword, you see that the attack goes up eventually. And if I go over here and I attack this sheep, it used some mana, right? See, and it updates in real time. Okay, that's very important. Every swipe takes, I think it's like 2 mana from it. That amount is also defined by you. Okay, I think that defines everything that this spec entails. Okay, so yeah.